All right,
Yeah,
let's move on.
let's do it.
Next, we've got another literary touchstone. This is the mammoth statue of Solzhenitsyn. Yes?
It is, but it hasn't changed on my screen yet.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if there's a delay or something, or
There may be, but just carry on. You know
okay,
the image.
sure. So I didn't realize until a few days before our trip that Solzhenitsyn also has links to this region, specifically to Kislovodsk. Solzhenitsyn obviously doesn't have the standing of a Lermontov in Russian culture. I mean, Lermontov plays number two to Pushkin in terms of the national poet. So
Mm-hmm.
he's very celebrated. Uh, and we know that, yeah, that Solzhenitsyn had a much more contentious relationship with the government. He was exiled on repeatedly. The first time for writing a letter that I think's kind of, I don't know how veiled it was, but it was critical of Stalin. And so he was sent down south. I don't have the exact place in front of me right now, but yeah. Um, and I think he kind of went through various gradations of exile, starting with experiences in a gulag, and later a kind of he had to just be isolated in one place, but he was no longer like a prisoner. He was in Kazakhstan actually, and that'll be an image that I don't know if it's the next image, but
Let's see. There's a house. Can you see
okay.
the
So this
house?
is this is the museum and where he spent his first few years. Quite a funky piece of architecture, as you can see, and very good guide. The museum itself isn't too big, but the guide is passionate about him, about his life, and through my wife, I was able to pepper her with questions. So I think she appreciated my hunger. I was pretty caffeinated, I guess, as well, which maybe helped. But yeah, I think I don't know if the same question would cross your mind, but I was just kind of wondering, like, how happy the Russian government is with Solzhenitsyn now. What what position he's allowed to have in society, and I
Well,
discovered that actually,
he seems to
yeah,
have been rehabilitated.
absolutely. So we know that he was exiled twice. As I said, the first time for this letter that criticized Stalin, and the second time after publishing Gulag Archipelago,
Mm-hmm.
which was published in France, but obviously like came out, and then his citizenship was reinstated in the 80s, and he came back to Russia, and I think died maybe in Kislovodsk or that area. Could be wrong about that, but I know that he did come back to the area. Um, but uh, but yeah, Putin is apparently a big fan. Met with Solzhenitsyn several times, and
Our friends in Vladivostok told us about that.
oh really?
Yeah. That's how I knew he had been rehabilitated. Like he met with Putin, and he seems to have been a Putin supporter. Like he thought he was the man to lead Mother Russia.
Right, and so that some scholars may argue that that was a different incarnation of Putin, like an early Putin. Whether you think that modern day Putin is like the real Putin and the previous Putin was, I don't know, playing more like lip service, whether you think he changed or whether you think he's always been the same. that.
Maybe it's a new Solzhenitsyn
Yep.
that
I mean,
embraced Putin, or maybe that's
right.
how he always was. What I
Yeah, I
wonder
mean,
is how he escaped death. Like, why was he not killed? Why was he just exiled and sent to the prison camp, to the gulag?
I mean, it seems like a lot of people were. I mean, a lot of people were sent to the gulag, first of all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I mean Dostoevsky, right?
Well, that's
Um,
pre-Soviet. We're talking about during the Stalin era.
sure, but I mean Anna Akhmatova, she wasn't killed.
Right.
Even now, I mean, it's horrible what happens to activists now for the most minor protests. I mean, the most recent news story in the past week was this activist who, when the war started, she changed some shopping labels in a supermarket. I don't know if you read this story,
Mm-mm.
but she like slipped out. She replaced the price tags with little like anti-war notes,
Okay.
and a 74-year-old woman reported her, and she was sentenced to 7 years in prison this week.
That's a bit extreme.
And in her comments, the old woman said, "Maybe the sentence is a bit long, but I reported a crime. What should I not do that?" It was just funny for me to.
No, you shouldn't.
So
All
yeah,
right.
all I'm trying to say is that it is ridiculously extreme. But I'm just saying the activists are not being killed, and maybe the same thing could be said for that time, right? Like
Right. They
a lot
just
of writers,
get banished or imprisoned.
yeah. Uh, and so now we're looking at the image, which I just found very interesting, of Solzhenitsyn, the sole Caucasian, if we want to use that term, amongst a group of Kazakhs, and so again, he wasn't imprisoned here, but he was, I don't know, what's the better term for, he had to stay here.
Exiled.
Okay, he was exiled to this town in Kazakhstan, and he became a physics and math teacher. So his background was in physics and math, and that's what he was up to
You know,
there.
he was in Vermont for a while, so I guess this is
Okay,
before he ended up in the States.
very much so, very much so. I mean, this is
So who are
1955.
these people?
They're Kazakh
Okay, they're
students.
Kazakhs, but who are they? Like they run the well, he wasn't in a camp at this time. He was just exiled here and
No, yeah,
living.
that's what I'm saying. He's just living in this town, and it's
Okay, so these are just uh, town folk
his
or what?
students.
His students. Okay.
His students, yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Um,
they look very Asian.
yeah. I have a kind of cool little quote here about Solzhenitsyn and just his writing. So he was released from camp in March 1953, uh, and yeah, placed in exile in this place called Kokterek, a tiny hamlet on the southern border of Kazakhstan, where the writer eventually received a job as a teacher of mathematics and physics at the local school. All his spare time was now taken up by a feverish haste to record on paper the prodigious amount of verse he had composed in the preceding years. Camp regulations had strictly forbidden inmates from keeping any notes, but Solzhenitsyn had hit upon a method of preserving his thoughts. He cast them in poetic form and committed them to memory, using an elaborate ritual to review the growing text at regular intervals. The major product of this activity was the narrative poem Dorozhenka, The Way, which allegedly contained over 10,000 lines of verse. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
What was the method?
I don't know. I mean, probably, lots of actors have mnemonic devices, and what's the expression about like necessity is the mother of invention, right? So
Mm-hmm. Okay, it'll
uh
remain a trade secret.
but and he apparently thought that the verse itself was pretty poor. Like wasn't thrilled about but I mean, obviously, it was probably mainly used as just a form of memorization, right? So
Mm-hmm.
anyway,
Now,
do you want
who
to say
is?
anything about Solzhenitsyn before we move on? Like your own
Well,
vibe
I
or
mean,
relationship to him?
I've read some of his poetry. I don't know. It sounds like you're describing an epic. I read like some uh, free verse, experimental. It's like prose poetry. What I read. Uh, he's
So
talking
you haven't
about.
read Gulag Archipelago?
No, no. In terms of the novels, I've read and I taught One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich.
Yeah, I've read that, and I haven't read Gulag Archipelago
Yeah,
either.